Kevlar vests before. So they all had to get measured for Kevlar vests. And they were saying, you know, this is the last thing we need because the suits are so hot they have to wear in gas masks and all the rest. Now they have to put on protective Kevlar vests. And they can only operate, particularly in hot climates like the Middle East, probably no more than, I don't know, 45 minutes maybe in their suits. And you gotta come back and pull them off and have some water and, you know, relax a little bit and wipe off all the sweat. I mean, they literally must lose tens of pounds, you know, through sweat in these suits when they go into hot climates like this. And questions I'll leave you with, you know, what does Syria's chemical weapons stockpile consist of? We're still trying to learn that. Is it weaponized at all? Is it not weaponized? Is it bulk storage? Is it precursor chemicals? And of course, all of that, once we learn all that, will then dictate what the destruction operations really look like. Second question, what destruction technologies are best? You know, there's all sorts of ways you can destroy chemicals, chemical agents, weapon systems, explosives, rocket propellant, all the rest. Production facilities you can just hammer on them, you know, sledgehammer on them, destroy them. Weapons, if they don't have any explosive or propellant or agent in them, just hammer on them, you know, or run them over as we did in Libya with a bulldozer. You know, line them up in a field, just run the bulldozer over, flatten them out, and send them off to the scrap heap. But if you're dealing with live agent, and particularly if it's live agent in a weapon that may have explosives or rocket propellant inside it, then it's very expensive, very dangerous, very complicated. And a number of the US weapons, particularly a rocket called the M55 rocket, have exploded in the demilitarization operation. And luckily, in our case, it's always robotically done. The punch and drain, the guillotining and separating and pulling out the agent and the like is all done by robots behind armored doors and windows. And so in the case of Syria, I hope that doesn't have to be the case, because if it is, it's going to take a long time to do it. Can the chemicals and agents and weapons be moved? So the question is, if they're in 40 sites, can we move them into, you can't move the production facilities and the laboratories. You can destroy that stuff actually pretty quickly. But are the agents able to be moved into one site, say in northwest Syria? And can there be a security perimeter built around that site so it's very secure? And that's going to have to have a lot of security operations behind it and protective gears, not just UN peacekeeping forces. It would be so the UN peace enforcement forces, probably with Syrian government forces as well. Or do we have to go into different sites? And if we have to go into different sites, can't move the weapons, then you've got to have mobile technologies and the like, which could be very dangerous to operate. And how much will this all cost? I mean, one of the issues that people don't think about is the OPCW has, you know, an inspection group. And that inspection group, which has to inspect all destruction, all declared facilities, and all chemical industry, and has to be ready for any challenge inspection. If a country makes what's called a challenge, they have to move into that wherever they're challenging something going on within 48 hours. And they used to have somewhere between 200 and 225 inspectors. And these are all heavily trained individuals, some of them trained for stockpile destruction, some trained for industry inspections, and a little combination of both. But now they're down to 112 inspectors because of budget cuts over the last 5 years. And the fact that there's no current demilitarization operation going on in the United States, so there are no inspectors needed in a major full-time way. When you have a demil operation going on, the inspectors are on site 24/7. They live at the destruction facility. You know, it must be one of the most miserable experiences. Interesting, but in some ways I think one of the most boring experiences ever. Count all the weapons going in and make sure nothing's coming out the other end, you know, except water and carbon dioxide and heavy metals and industrial salts. So the big question for the OPCW is they need another 100 inspectors, like today. And the question has been for the last month, where do we get all these inspectors? It takes months to train these people. And how much will it cost? That depends on what the size and the consistency of the stockpile looks like. But it could cost, you know, in the range of at least a couple of $100 million. And the whole budget of the OPCW is $100 billion. So it could cost more than double the budget of the OPCW. So there's a new voluntary trust fund that's been set up for countries to voluntarily give extra money, but Syria is not going to pay for all this, nor do they probably even have the money to do it. So those are all just practical, logistical questions. And my final points, because I've gone on too long, I know. Buried chemical weapons, a big issue. I won't say much about it except that every major warring power in the last century dumped most of its chemical weapons in trenches and buried it. And as some of you know, we have a big ongoing, remediation site in Northwest Washington D.C. Called Spring Valley. Anyone here heard of it? You have, Greg, but anyone heard of Spring Valley? You have, okay. Spring Valley was a dump site, a chemical weapons dump site right after World War I. And when there were no homes in Northwest Washington, the dump site came from the World War I Chemical Weapons Laboratory, which was at American University. And in 1993, in a small construction project, now that 1,000 beautiful homes have been built there, they found chemical weapons in the backyard and said, what are chemical weapons doing? And these were old, rusty, obviously World War I weapons. And they discovered that, in fact, they dug trenches back in 1918, 1919, and just dumped all these weapons they were developing. And none of the construction crews, when they were building these homes, ever said anything. They probably found them, I'm sure, in a whole range of areas and just dug a deeper hole, bulldozed them in and poured concrete over it or something and built the house. And so there's been an ongoing program there. And this is actually a picture of some of the excavation in Spring Valley. There's been over 1,000 homes surveyed, probably a couple of hundred of them excavated. And the latest case this year, you can go and look at this actually, it's actually quite interesting. I've toured this whole area a couple times. Latest case is that the home of the president of American University has just been torn to the ground because the former president's families were getting very sick in the home. And actually has not been inhabited for about 10 years now. And the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers finally decided that one of the biggest dump sites is likely under the basement of the home. And so they've had to tear this $2 million home down to the ground, and they're now excavating the whole lot down to bedrock, which is like 20 feet, I think, to find out what they can find and all the chemicals that have been left there. That's probably my son texting me. Sea dump chemical weapons. Every ocean of the world has had sea dump weapons. It's a big growing issue. We're getting more involved. We have a team right now in Vieques. Anyone know where Vieques is? Any Spanish-speaking people here? Vieques is just east of Puerto Rico. It was a bombing range and a dump site for 60 years. And so we're looking there now because of the elevated health disease rates there. Yeah?
Just a quick question. How long can they be active? 100 years, more?
The weapons they picked up in Spring Valley, most of them actually have still been dangerous. So a lot of it's been decomposed too, and they only find arsenic and the composite chemicals, or they find it in the groundwater. But they've actually picked up something in the range of 35 or 40 live weapons out of 100 years later. So there's actually very little knowledge about how long a weapon lasts. And probably depends on all sorts of conditions. And last point is a UN resolution. We did do a UN resolution 3 years ago now actually, on sea dump chemical weapons, asking all member states to report back this fall, actually the 68th UN General Assembly, on what they're doing to clean the oceans of all the dump sites, which, as I say, are in the Baltic and the Mediterranean, off Georges Bank in New England, all around Hawaii, the west coast of the United States, and all around Australia and elsewhere. And I would say my last point is, this all leads to a weapon of mass destruction-free zone in the Middle East, we hope, in the long run. This is a bit idealistic at this point, as those of us in the field know. But Syria's accession, really provides pressure on Israel and Egypt to join the CWC, and also the BWC, which none of them have joined, the Biological Weapons Convention, and begin to address nuclear weapons in the Middle East, of course, both Israel and perhaps the plans of Iran. That's actually a picture of inspectors from the OPCW departing from The Hague. And I will stop there. You've all been very attentive, so I thank Greg and George Mason and all of you for being such polite attendees and listeners. So, do you want to host a few more questions or comments?
Some people
or
have questions. Feel free to
pop
take
those
your-
hands right up? Yeah, sure.
2 questions.
You were the first, yeah, very quick.
How does the
You've been urging, I know, to ask a few things. Yeah.
How does the OPCW fit within CWC?
Yeah, that's a good question, because most people talk about the United Nations inspection teams. Well, there aren't any United Nations inspectors. The OPCW is the organization which was established under the Chemical Weapons Convention, by the Chemical Weapons Convention, to implement the treaty. So the OPCW is the organization which basically serves all the states parties to the treaty, and it maintains the inspectorate. As I say, today 112 inspectors, but at times up to 200 inspectors. It's got another 300 people working there that manage all this, keep the records, put on the annual conference, do training programs all over the world for it's